I am 83 years old. My mother died when I was 23, but I have spent the last 60 years of my life trying to earn her approval. 60 years making decisions based on what a dead woman would think, living by rules she set decades ago, choosing safety and respectability over happiness, because that is what she would have wanted. My name is Patricia. I am sitting in a house my mother never saw, wearing clothes she never picked out, but still asking myself with every choice I make, what would Mother think? Even now, at 83, I can hear her voice in my head telling me what I should do, how I should act, who I should be. Before I die, before I finally join the woman whose ghost has controlled my life for 6 decades, I need to tell you what happens when you spend your entire existence trying to please someone who is no longer alive to be pleased. You think honoring your parents means living the life they wanted for you. You think carrying their values and expectations is the same as carrying their love. You think making them proud from beyond the grave is a beautiful way to honor their memory. You are wrong. Let me tell you about my mother, Elizabeth. Born in 1905, raised during an era when women had few choices and fewer opportunities. She married young, had children young, and spent her entire life following rules she never questioned, because questioning them was not an option for women of her generation. Mother was not a cruel woman. She was not abusive or deliberately harmful. She was simply a product of her time, a woman who believed that there was one right way to live, and that her job as a mother was to make sure I followed that path, whether I wanted to or not. According to Mother, good women married young to respectable men. They kept clean houses, raised well-behaved children, and never caused scandals or embarrassment. They did not have careers beyond teaching or nursing, which were acceptable until marriage. They did not travel alone, live alone, or make decisions alone. They certainly did not put their own desires ahead of their family's needs or society's expectations. Mother died suddenly in 1964 when I was 23 years old. Heart attack. One day, she was telling me how to iron my skirts properly. The next day, she was gone. But her voice in my head did not die with her. If anything, it got louder. The first time I disappointed my dead mother was in 1965. I had been dating a man named David for 2 years. David was kind, funny, and loved me deeply. But he was not what Mother would have considered suitable husband material. He was an artist, a painter, who made beautiful work but very little money. He lived in a small apartment above a bakery and drove a car that broke down more often than it ran. But I loved David. I loved his passion for his art, his gentleness with children, his ability to find beauty in ordinary things. When he asked me to marry him, every part of my heart wanted to say yes, but I could hear Mother's voice clearly. Patricia, you cannot marry a man who cannot provide for you. What will people think? How will you survive? Artists are not husband material. Find someone respectable, someone with a steady income and a future. So I said no to David. I told him I needed more time, that marriage was a big decision, that we should wait until he was more financially stable. David tried for 2 more years to prove himself worthy, taking jobs he hated to make more money, trying to become the kind of man he thought I needed instead of the man he was. Finally, David gave up. Not on loving me, but on trying to become someone else for my approval. He moved to California to pursue his art seriously, and I never saw him again. I heard years later that he became quite successful, that his paintings hang in galleries across the country, that he married a woman who loved him for his talent instead of despite it. I spent the rest of the 1960s dating men Mother would have approved of: accountants, lawyers, men with steady incomes and conventional ambitions, men who bored me to tears but looked good on paper and would have made Mother proud. In 1969, I married Robert. Robert was everything Mother wanted for me: successful, reliable, respectable, financially secure. He worked for an insurance company, owned a nice house in a good neighborhood, and had plans for a conventional future that included children, church attendance, and steady advancement up the corporate ladder. Robert was not a bad man. He was not cruel or unkind. But he was not David, and I was not in love with him the way I had been in love with David. I married Robert because Mother would have been proud of my choice, because he represented everything she valued: stability, respectability, security. But marrying for Mother's approval instead of for love meant I spent 38 years in a marriage that felt more like a business arrangement than a romance. Robert and I lived parallel lives in the same house, polite and cordial, but never passionate, never deeply connected, never truly intimate. Robert died in 2007. At his funeral, people talked about what a good provider he had been, what a reliable husband, what a steady man. No one mentioned love or passion or the deep connection that makes marriage worth the effort, because there had not been any of those things, just the kind of respectability that Mother valued above happiness. After Robert died, I was 70 years old and alone for the first time since I was 23. For the first time in my adult life, I had the opportunity to make choices based on what I wanted instead of what Mother would have approved of. But I discovered something terrible. I had no idea what I wanted. I had spent 47 years following Mother's rules and Robert's preferences, and I had never developed my own opinions about anything important. I did not know what kind of food I enjoyed when I was not cooking to please someone else. I did not know what I wanted to do with my free time when I was not managing someone else's schedule. I had lived so long trying to please my dead mother that I had never learned to please myself. I had never learned who I was when I was not being who Mother wanted me to be. In 2008, at 71 years old, I considered moving to Italy. I had always been fascinated by Italian art and culture, had dreamed of seeing the places where the Renaissance masters created their masterpieces. With Robert gone and my children grown, there was nothing stopping me from spending a year or two abroad, from finally seeing the world I had dreamed about, but never dared to explore. But I could hear Mother's voice immediately. "Patricia, ladies do not travel alone. What will people think of a woman your age wandering around foreign countries by herself? It is not proper. It is not safe. Stay home where you belong." So I stayed home. I stayed in the house Robert bought, in the town Mother chose for us, living the safe, conventional life that a dead woman had designed for me 60 years earlier. In 2010, I considered going back to school. I had always been interested in psychology, had always wondered what it would be like to help people understand their emotions and heal from their traumas. At 73, I was still young enough to get a degree, smart enough to do the work, financially secure enough to afford the tuition. But Mother's voice was right there. "Patricia, you are too old to be a student. People will think you are having some kind of breakdown, trying to start over at your age. Be content with the life you have. Stop reaching for things that are not meant for you." So I did not go back to school. I did not pursue the career I had always dreamed of. I stayed home and volunteered at the church and kept house for no one, and pretended that this was enough because it was what Mother would have wanted for me. In 2012, I met a man named Frank at a grief counseling group. Frank was a widower, intelligent and kind, with grown children and grandchildren he adored. He asked me out for coffee, then dinner, then weekend trips to nearby cities. For the first time in my life, I felt what it might be like to be with someone who truly enjoyed my company, who thought I was interesting and funny and worth spending time with. Frank and I were compatible in ways Robert and I had never been. We liked the same books, shared similar values, enjoyed each other's conversation. Frank made me laugh, made me feel young again, made me remember what it felt like to be desired rather than just needed. After a year of dating, Frank asked me to marry him. He was 82, I was 75. We were both old enough to know what we wanted and young enough to enjoy whatever time we had left together. But Mother's voice was louder than my own happiness. "Patricia, you cannot remarry at your age. What will people think? You should be a dignified widow, not an old woman chasing romance. Robert has been dead only 5 years. It is indecent. It is embarrassing." So I said no to Frank. I told him I was not ready for marriage again, that I valued our friendship too much to risk ruining it with romance. Frank was disappointed but respectful. He continued to spend time with me as a friend, but the possibility of something deeper was gone because I had chosen Mother's dead approval over my own living happiness. Frank died in 2018. At his funeral, his children talked about how much he had loved their mother, how difficult it had been for him to be alone after she died, how happy he had been during the years he spent with me. They thanked me for bringing joy back into his life during his final years. I realized that I could have had 6 years of deep love and companionship with Frank. I could have had a marriage based on genuine affection rather than social expectations. But I had chosen to honor my dead mother's opinions instead of my own living heart. And now it was too late to change that choice. The most tragic part of living for Mother's approval was not just what I gave up, but what I never discovered about myself. I never learned what I was capable of when I was not trying to fit into someone else's narrow definition of acceptability. I never found out if I was brave enough to travel alone, smart enough to succeed in graduate school, interesting enough to sustain a relationship based on mutual fascination rather than mutual convenience. I never discovered my own talents, my own interests, my own capacity for growth and adventure. I lived my entire adult life as the person Mother wanted me to be, which meant I never got to find out who I could have become if I had been free to make my own choices and my own mistakes. The rules Mother gave me were not even her own rules. They were rules that had been imposed on her by a society that limited women's options and told them that their value came from their ability to please others rather than from their ability to please themselves. Mother had lived in a world where women could not vote, could not own property, could not work in most professions, could not make independent choices about their own lives. She had internalized those limitations and passed them on to me, even though I was born into a world where women had many more opportunities. But I was so busy trying to please Mother that I never questioned whether her rules made sense for my life. I never asked whether the limitations that had been imposed on her should also be imposed on me. I never considered that honoring Mother's memory might mean living more fully than she had been allowed to live, not less fully. By the time I was old enough to understand that I had been living someone else's life instead of my own, it felt too late to change. I was in my 70s, set in my ways, surrounded by a life that felt like a costume I could not take off. Even now, at 83, I struggle with decisions. Should I sell this house that holds no happy memories and move somewhere new? Should I spend my remaining money on experiences instead of saving it for children who already have everything they need? Should I finally take that trip to Italy, enroll in those classes, write that book I always wanted to write? And even now, Mother's voice is right there, telling me to be practical, to act my age, to be content with what I have instead of reaching for what I want. Even now, I find myself asking what a woman who died 60 years ago would think instead of asking what I think, what I want, what would make my remaining years meaningful. The tragedy is not that Mother had opinions about how I should live. Parents are supposed to have opinions, supposed to try to guide their children toward good choices. The tragedy is that I never learned to develop my own opinions, never learned to trust my own judgment, never learned to differentiate between honoring Mother's memory and being trapped by it. Honoring Mother's memory should have meant living courageously, making the most of opportunities she never had, becoming the fullest version of myself that I could become. Instead, I honored her memory by making myself small, by choosing safety over growth, by living the limited life she had been forced to live instead of the expanded life I had the opportunity to create. I spent 60 years trying to please a woman who loved me enough that she would have wanted me to be happy, not just obedient. Mother's approval was never supposed to be more important than my own fulfillment. Her values were supposed to be a starting point for my own development. not the ending point of my growth. But I was so afraid of disappointing her, even after she was dead, that I disappointed myself instead. I was so worried about being the daughter she wanted that I never became the woman I was meant to be. Now I am 83 years old and Mother has been dead for 60 years. I have spent more time trying to please her after her death than I spent actually knowing her during her life. I have given more consideration to her opinions about my choices than I have given to my own opinions about my choices. And the cruelest irony is that Mother is not here to be pleased. All that approval I worked so hard to earn, all those rules I followed so carefully, all those opportunities I gave up to maintain her standards, none of it matters to anyone except me. Mother is not sitting somewhere keeping score of how well I followed her advice. She is not disappointed in me when I consider stepping outside the boundaries she set. She is not watching my life unfold and judging whether I am living up to her expectations. Mother is gone. The only person who benefits from my adherence to her rules is the part of me that is too afraid to take responsibility for my own choices, too afraid to risk making mistakes, too afraid to disappoint the only authority figure whose approval I was ever sure of. Living for Mother's dead approval has been a way of avoiding the risk of living for my own standards and potentially failing to meet them. It has been easier to follow someone else's outdated roadmap than to chart my own course through unfamiliar territory. But following someone else's roadmap means I never learn to navigate for myself. Following someone else's rules means I never learn to make my own rules. Living for someone else's approval means I never learn to approve of myself. Young people who are struggling with parental expectations, who are torn between honoring your parents and honoring yourselves, please learn from my mistake. Your parents' approval is not more important than your own happiness. Their values are not more important than your own values. Their dreams for your life are not more important than your own dreams for your life. Honor your parents by becoming the best version of yourself, not by becoming their version of you. Honor them by living fully and courageously, by making the most of opportunities they may not have had, by becoming everything you are capable of becoming. If your parents truly love you, they want you to be happy and fulfilled, not just obedient. If they are gone, they are not watching your life unfold with disappointment when you make choices they would not have made. They are not keeping score of how well you follow rules that may no longer make sense for your life. Dead people cannot be pleased or disappointed. Only living people can be pleased or disappointed. Stop trying to please people who are beyond pleasing and start trying to please the person who has to live with the consequences of your choices, you. I am 83 years old and I wasted 60 years trying to earn approval from someone who is not here to give it. I chose safety over happiness, convention over authenticity, Mother's dead voice over my own living heart. Do not make my mistake. Do not spend your life trying to please people who are no longer alive to be pleased. Live for yourself. Choose for yourself. Make mistakes for yourself. Become who you are meant to become, not who someone else wanted you to be. Because the alternative is this: being 83 years old and realizing you never lived your own life, that you spent decades following a script written by someone who is not here to applaud your performance. I am tired now. Tired of living for a ghost. Tired of asking a dead woman's permission to be happy. Tired of honoring someone's memory by making my own life smaller instead of larger. For my remaining years, however many they are, I am going to try to live for myself. I am going to try to please Patricia instead of Mother, to make choices based on what I want instead of what she would have wanted. It may be too late to have the life I could have had if I had started choosing for myself 60 years ago. But it is not too late to have whatever life is still possible for an 83-year-old woman who is finally ready to disappoint her mother in order to satisfy herself. Choose your own life. Please yourself. Make your own mistakes. Become who you are meant to become. Because the people who truly love you want you to be happy more than they want you to be obedient. even the dead ones, especially the dead ones.